Most folks wouldn't call what I do exciting. I work hydroline inspection up north. Long stretches of cable cutting through the woods, towers planted in the middle of nowhere. It's not glamorous, but it's steady, and it keeps the lights on for a lot of people who never think about where their power actually comes from. That winter, I was assigned to check a line that ran past a little town most maps barely even bother with. The job was simple. Ride out by sled, climb a few towers, make sure the cables hadn't iced over too heavy or cracked. Alone most of the time, unless a buddy rode out with me. Radios worked when they wanted to, but up in those valleys, you couldn't count on them. Mostly, you relied on your own two hands. Isolation never bothered me. Some guys went stir-crazy after a week, but I liked the quiet. The snow made everything clean and simple. My world shrank down to the rattle of my harness and the hum of the line overhead. It was work, plain and honest. But up there, you hear things. It's not like the city, where noise is constant. Out there, silence has weight. It presses on you until the smallest sound, like a branch creaking or snow slipping off a spruce, feels sharp enough to cut. Most of the time I brushed it off. Woods make noise, that's just the way of it. Still, I remember telling myself on that trip, don't let the quiet get in your head. Easier said than done, really. The further I went, the more it felt like the trees were leaning close and listening to me. I thought it was just the job, just the cold getting to me. I didn't know it was something else. The first couple of days went as smooth as they ever do. Long rides over snow, towers groaning under ice, steel bolts cold enough to burn your gloves if you touched them bare. Nothing I hadn't seen 100 times. But by the third day, the silence didn't sit right with me anymore. I'd be half up a tower, tightening a clamp, when a sharp crack split the stillness below. It wasn't the groan of ice, not the steady shift of wind. This was different. A branch snapping clean in half. Except the air was dead calm. No gust, no storm, just silence, then crack, echoing like a gunshot across the snow. I told myself over and over that it was nothing. Could have been an old spruce giving up under its own weight. Those things happen. But the timing always felt off. Like whatever was making that noise was waiting for me to be listening. And then that's when the smell would show up. Constant, every time I heard one of those noises. It was rotten and metallic, like blood that had been sitting too long in a bucket or something. You don't really get smells like that in the cold. The air's too sharp and too clean. It seems to wipe everything down to nothing, but every now and then, a wave of it rolled past, even without those sounds. And it was heavy enough to coat the back of my throat. I checked my gear, my fuel, even the sled. Nothing. No reason anything would smell on my half. Then I would find tracks, just off the line, where the snow would lay untouched because nothing else was out there. At first I thought maybe a moose or maybe a bear happening to pass through. But the longer I looked, the less these prints ever made sense. They were always long, too long, with a shape that was partially human but partially animal too. The toes would be pointed strange, sometimes in weird angles, sometimes it looked like the toes had been broken clean into a right degree angle. The heels would be narrow, strides would be uneven, like something loping forward with too much weight on one side. I remember crouching there once, tracing the edges with my glove, and shook my head. Bears can fool you in the snow. Snow can shift and make a moose track look wrong. I'd seen all sorts of illusions out here, but that story, it's just kind of what I went with to make myself feel better. Still, I caught myself checking over my shoulder more than once on the ride back to camp. I was up in the midline tower the next afternoon, checking a brace where the ice had built thick. And I heard it. Clear as day. My name. It wasn't shouted. It wasn't casual. It just said flat, like someone trying it out on their tongue. It came from below, drifting up from the cold air. I froze with one hand on the steel, looked down. Nothing but snow stretching back to the tree line. My sled sat where I parked it, silent, no one around. "Hello?" I called back, feeling stupid. Maybe one of the crew had swung out my way, though it didn't happen often. Work was spread thin then, and everyone had their own towers to worry about. The silence held. I shook my head, muttering about echoes. Sound carried strange up here. You'd hear your own boot crunch bounce back like someone else was walking. That had to be it, right? I went back to tightening bolts, telling myself that I imagined it, until it came again. My name, same tone and pitch. I mean, exactly the same. No echo hits perfect like that. It was like this thing was on a recorder and somebody had just rewound and pressed play again. I pulled my radio off my belt, thumbed the button. Anybody near Tower 42? Static crackled for a while. Then a voice finally answered, distant and tiny. Negative. Everyone's still south of you. Why? I hesitated. I didn't really want to seem like the kind of spook. Nothing. Thought I heard something. Copy. I clipped the radio back on. But my gut nodded for some reason. You see, I was never the kind of spook easy, but this just didn't feel right for some reason. What would be out there saying my name? An hour later, while I was packing up my tools, the voice came a third time. Only it wasn't clean this time. It was my name again, sure, but stretched now, rasping around the edges like it came through broken glass. The syllables dragged, then warped into a mutter that I couldn't make sense of. Half words, half nonsense, really, like someone mumbling in their sleep. I spun in a low circle, snow crunching under my boots, but the valley was empty. The smell came again too, faint but sharp, metallic rot thick in my nose. I swore under my breath, packed faster than I should have, and rode back before dark. For the first time, and I mean the first time ever, I didn't like being out there alone. The next day I tried to bury myself in work, focus on bolts, ice, readings, anything but the strange prints or that voice in the wind. Routine keeps you steady out here. At least that's what I told myself. I was tightening a line brace when movement caught my eye down below. Something dark cutting through the trees quick, faster than anything that should have been able to move in the snow like that. My head snapped toward it, but by the time I locked on, there was nothing there. Just the sway of a branch like it had been shoved, snow sifting down in a slow curtain. I told myself it had to be a moose, maybe a wolf pack spooked by my presence. But then it happened again. This time, I saw it leap. A shadow stretched and thin, launching from one trunk to another like it didn't care about gravity. It covered 10 feet of air, easy, maybe even more, and then it just melted back into the dark. No animal I know moves like that. Not in silence and not that fast. Later, while coiling my rope, I caught another glimpse. This time I saw pale. It was limbs, long and narrow, sliding out of sight as something was pulling itself back behind the trees almost. The flash was so quick I almost doubted it, but the image stuck. What I saw was skin, too light for any predator, hands too long, and whatever it was, I got the distinct impression that it was on 2 legs, and very skinny. Still, I tried to shake it off. Told myself the light was playing tricks on me. Told myself that I was working myself up and letting my imagination run wild. It was just shadows and branches, snow glare on my goggles. I think really I knew better though. Every nerve started to scream that something was there watching me. And believe me, when you're out there on your own, you don't want anything out there watching you. That night at the site trailer, I mentioned it to the guys. I just casually asked, "You ever seen anything moving near the tree line? Big, fast, maybe like it's leaping?" They laughed, of course. These were men that never even had families, that liked to go to the bar just to pick fights, people that came out there just to get the job done and be left alone. Most of them said the cold was getting to me, that I'd been alone for too long. One of them smirked and muttered, "Careful, eh? You'll start hearing the Yeti next." I forced a laugh with them, but it landed flat, because I felt I already had seen something. But it definitely wasn't a Yeti. One evening, I stayed later than I should have out there. I was finishing a check on the far end of a line. The light went fast behind the ridge, and by the time I rode back to camp, the sky was deep blue, and the stars were shining bright. The cold had teeth in it out there, biting every inch of exposed skin. I hauled my gear into the shack we used as a base. Nothing more than wooden walls and a cot, really, a heater that barely worked, a little stove. I set the water to boil, rubbing my hands together, when the feeling hit. The feeling of just being watched, even out there with the rest of the people. I've worked plenty of jobs alone, hiked hundreds of miles of bush. I know what it feels like when eyes are on you, even if you can't see them. And that night, the air was thick with it. Then came the sound. Crunch. Snow under feet. Then another, circling wide around the shack. My head snapped up. I killed the stove and the silence rushed in, heavy enough for that every creak of wood sounded like a hammer. Crunch. Crunch. Like something or someone was out there pacing. "Who's out there?" I called. But to me my voice sounded thin and small. Of course I didn't get an answer. But then a voice did come. My name again. Drawn out this time. Ragged, scraping across the air like it hurt to speak. Closer now. Almost pressed against the wall. The shack rattled suddenly, like something heavy brushed against it. Snow slid from the roof with a thump. My heart hammered in my throat. I grabbed the lamp from the shelf, lit it fast, flame trembling as it caught. Shadows spilled across the walls, flickering and stretching. I stepped to the window and froze. For a split second, I swear I saw something at the tree line. Gaunt, tall, swaying side to side like the wind was moving it, only the trees around it were still. What I saw had arms that hung low, fingers dragging in the snow. But it seemed like as soon as I blinked, it was gone. The crunching stopped after that too, and the voice went silent. Only the lamp hissed, shadows dancing wild across the shack walls. I stood there until my knees shook from holding still too long. I had a flare in my other hand, ready to light it up if the lamp went out. I felt, truly, that whatever it was out there, it wanted me to know that I wasn't alone. I didn't sleep that night. I sat up on the cot with the lamp burning low, flare clutched to my hand until my fingers cramped, rifle next to me on the cot. Every time the shadow shifted, I thought I saw something move. By dawn, I'd already made my decision. The job wasn't worth this. I'd radio in an excuse, blame the cold, blame the equipment, whatever it took. I just knew I wasn't staying out another night. I packed fast, shoving tools and clothes into my sled bag with no care for order. The whole time, the silence pressed on me. It was heavy and sharp, and then it broke once more. Crunch. I froze. The sound came from outside, circling again, deliberate and slow. My throat went as dry as it could. Then came my name, once again, raspy through the trees. Longer now, stretched like rubber, vowels dragged until they fell apart. The sound scraped across my nerves like a blade on steel. I slung the pack over my shoulder, pushed out into the brittle daylight. The snow squeaked under my boots as I moved towards the sled, but every step I took, another step answered from the tree line. Something was out there pacing me. When I pulled the starter cord, the machine coughed and sputtered, and behind me, the rasping turned into something worse. A broken laugh, choking and hollow, like it was trying to copy what laughter was supposed to sound like, but had no idea how to be happy. The sound actually made bile rise in my throat. The sled finally caught, engine roaring. I gunned it, tearing across the snow, but I couldn't stop myself from looking. On the ridge, I am 100% certain that I saw something leap. A pale, stretched figure, moving between trunks like a shadow unchained from the ground. It landed without a sound, arms braced against bark before slipping out of sight again. I pinned the throttle. Time to get the hell out of there. Trees blurred past, snow spit in the wake. I didn't slow, didn't breathe right even. I didn't move or think, I just drove until the line gave way to the old service road and the squat shape of the site trailer. Only then did I stop. I didn't want to see if it had followed me out. When I rolled into the yard that afternoon, the other guys noticed right away. My face must have said enough, because they stopped joking and asked what happened. I told them pieces, tracks, noises, the voice, not everything, not the laughter, not the thing leaping through the trees. Most of them laughed anyway, said I was tired, that the cold messes with your head. One guy told me I'd been listening to too many stories. Maybe he was right. But another man, one of the older linemen, stayed quiet while the others carried on. He found me later, when we were alone. He asked me exactly where I'd been working. When I told him, he just nodded slow and said, "Stay clear of that stretch." Then he walked off, like that was all that needed saying. I didn't go back. My foreman shuffled me to another job closer to town, and I didn't argue. I didn't want to see that line again. I never saw that thing clear. Not really. But I didn't have to. I know that while I was out there, I was not at the top of the food chain. I was prey. And that thing was the hunter. I always say my brother's the crazy one, but the truth is, I usually end up going along with whatever he's got in mind. So that makes me just as crazy, right? That's how we found ourselves out on the snowmobiles that Saturday afternoon, tearing through the trails instead of doing anything useful back home. I was 17. He'd just turned 19, and the machines were practically all he talked about since he saved enough to buy his own. We weren't hunting, not looking for anything particular, just burning fuel and time, like brothers do when the world feels small and the winter feels endless. The air had that sharp, glassy bite to it, the kind that cuts through your jacket and makes your nose hairs freeze. I remember the way it smelled. Part two-stroke exhaust from the sleds, part clean pine, part snow. The sound of the engines carried through the woods in waves, bouncing off the frozen trunks, fading, then swelling again when we leaned on the throttles. But for all the noise we were making, the rest of the forest was dead quiet. No chickadees calling from the branches, no distant tapping from a woodpecker, not even the whisper of squirrels moving through the trees. Just the creak of ice-laden limbs shifting against one another, groaning like old doors. Every time we let the sleds idle, it was like the silence leaned in close, waiting for us to notice it. We'd been riding about an hour, maybe a little more, weaving in and out of old logging trails that hadn't seen trucks in decades. The snow out there was untouched, smooth as poured concrete, and our machines carved the first tracks through it. It felt good to open them up on the straighter stretches, skis hissing across the powder, until we came around a bend and my brother's sled fishtailed as he braked hard. I throttled down quick, heart in my throat, and pulled up beside him. He just pointed off to the left, where the trees gave way to a clearing. At first I thought it was just a shadow, some dark patch in the snow, but the longer I stared, the more the shapes made sense. Black, jagged lines spread out like fingers of a hand. We killed the engines, and the silence that rushed in after felt louder than the sleds had. We trudged over, boots sinking deep. The smell hit us before we even saw the whole thing. That heavy, metallic stench. Blood. But blood that hadn't had time to freeze yet. Lying there in the churned-up snow was what I think used to be a deer. Maybe an elk. It was hard to say. The ribcage was cracked wide open like someone had pried it apart, meat stripped down to strings. Some of the blood did freeze into these thick black crusts around the edges. I've seen wolf kills before. They're messy, scattered, paw prints everywhere, fur ripped in clumps. This wasn't it. The snow was smooth around the carcass. Not a single track except the ones that we'd just made. No crows or ravens circling overhead, no fox darting in to steal scraps, just this thing, hollowed and wrong. It was sitting in the dead quiet of the clearing. I swallowed hard and said we should go, but my brother shot me a look. It was a half grin, half challenge. Aren't you curious? Whatever did this? It's big. Real big. Yeah, I know, that's why I wanted to get out of there. I didn't answer right away. The truth was, yeah, I was curious. Something about the way the carcass sat there, steaming in the cold, made it impossible to just turn back. But every part of me also knew better. This wasn't our business. Out here, you learn to respect what you didn't understand. And if some big animal had killed this deer, I didn't want to be the next thing that it targeted. Still, when he started walking past the carcass, following that faint drag between trees, I found myself stepping after him. Curiosity won, just like it always does. The drag marks led off into the trees. They were faint at first, but clearer the further we went. And they weren't like anything I had seen before. Our dad had took us out hunting lots of times. We've seen a lot of things out there. We knew how to identify tracks, for the most part. But what we were looking at, I couldn't place. They were too wide to be deer tracks, too long to be a wolf. Some of the prints looked almost human, but like something heavier than a man had pressed down. Every few feet, the snow was gouged in these long lines, like whatever it was, dragged something behind it. Or maybe it was dragging its own body. We stopped when we heard it. This low sound. Just a ripple in the distance at first, really. I thought it was just the wind creaking through the branches, but then it shifted. It sounded like now it was two, maybe three distinct noises. Wood cracking, like something brushing against tree trunks. Then under it, what sounded like frozen breath. Maybe a mutter. Not words exactly, but close enough to make my lungs start to pump. Whatever it was out there sounded low, using broken syllables like someone mumbling through a frozen throat. My brother's eyes widened and he mouthed, "You hear that?" I nodded, though every part of me wishes that I hadn't. The trail kept winding forward, deeper into the timber where the shadows had already started to thicken, and the stink grew heavier, clinging to the cold like smoke. We hadn't gone more than 50 feet deeper when it all started. At first it was faint, thin enough that I thought I just imagined it, just the woods playing tricks on you, maybe an echo from somewhere. But it was sure as hell a voice. Somewhere ahead, threading between the trees, just the faintest, "Hey." One word, sharp, almost flat, echoing off the branches. My brother stopped dead, his boot halfway in the air, and he looked at me. "You hear that?" he whispered. Before I could answer, it came again. Same pitch, same tone, exactly the same. "Hey." I swallowed hard, trying to convince myself that it was a hunter. Maybe, hopefully, though I knew no hunter would be out there without gear or a sled of his own, and nobody said the same word the exact same way twice in a row, like it was caught on a tape or something. Then it changed. My brother's name drifted out from the shadows. Not shouted or even spoken, just dropped into the air like this hollow, empty noise. And then mine, dragging the vowels too long, like someone trying to teach themselves how to say it. The hairs on my neck stood straight up, every single one of them. "Who's there?" my brother yelled, but his voice cracked in the middle, and the silence that followed after swallowed it whole. We both stood there, breath fogging the air, staring at the trees ahead, trying to figure out what was going on. And then we saw it. At first, I thought it was just a tree, some twisted dead trunk leaning in the gloom. But then it shifted. Well, unfolded, really. A figure, too tall, thin as a bone, too thin to even be alive. Its shoulders hunched. They were high, like it was trying to fold itself small. The skin caught a shred of dying light through the canopy. It was pale, grayish-white, a head set too far on its neck, arms long enough that the hands hung well past the knees. That was all it took. Seeing that thing, my legs moved before my brain caught up, and suddenly I was running, boots tearing through the snow. My brother was right beside me, both of us stumbling over our own tracks, fighting to retrace the way back to the sleds. Behind us, I could hear it moving. And then this other sound, a garbled, broken voice chasing us through the trees, spitting my name in pieces. The woods seemed to explode behind us. Every time I thought we'd put distance between us, the sound surged closer again. Then came the crack, this sharp splitting sound, like something heavy landed on wood. My head whipped sideways just in time to see that thing move parallel to us. Not running, but bounding, using its arms as much as it was using its legs, swinging between trees. It dropped low, then sprang again, a blur of this pale white shape against the shadows. My brother screamed to run faster. I couldn't look at it anymore anyway. I forced my eyes ahead, to where the line of trees broke open and the faint outline of our snowmobiles sat waiting like lifelines in the snow. My boots slipped. I went sprawling. Cold rushed down my back as snow filled my jacket, but I scrambled up as fast as I could, heart in my throat, and kept going. We stumbled into the clearing, half falling, half sprinting, helping each other stay up. Our sleds were there, coated in frost. My hand shook so bad I could barely get the key into the ignition. My brother swore, slapping at his throttle, yanking the choke. The silence between cranks was filled with a sound that I'll never forget. This guttural, tearing scream, half animal, half human, but twisted like a nightmare. It came through the tree line, hunched and wrong, steam boiling off its body in the cold. And then that scream rose again, and broke, turned into a ragged growl as it lunged towards us. My engine roared to life. I slammed the throttle, tracks spitting snow, and the machine lunged forward. A second later, my brother's sled kicked up beside me. Together, we tore across that clearing, Headlights bouncing, engines howling like trapped animals. It didn't matter that the snow was whipping us in the faces. All that mattered was putting as much distance between us and that thing as possible. I risked a glance back. It was still there, charging after us on all fours, limbs stretching insanely long. Too long, too fast. Snow was exploding under its hands and feet. I could hear the scream even over the machines. It was like it was tearing through the air and vibrating right into my chest. Honestly, it felt like those screams were already inside me. We pushed the machines as hard as they'd go, skis slamming over uneven drifts, the headlights cutting shaky tunnels through the darkness that was falling. For a sick second, I thought it would overtake us. Every time I looked back, it was closer. Its movements were jerky and wrong, erratic and uncontrolled, but still graceful in this weird way. And it was covering yards in a single bound. And then suddenly, it just stopped, like it lost interest in us or couldn't go any further. Maybe it couldn't leave its territory. I don't know how these things work. When you're looking at a supernatural predator, I think all bets are off. But either way, it dug its claws into the snow, its body jerking upright like something had yanked it back. The scream it let out was higher this time, almost pained and echoing across the flats. Then it turned, wandered off, spun, sprinted the other way, vanished into the tree line in a blur of pale limbs and shadow. We didn't stop to wonder why. I didn't care. We didn't stop until all the forest gave way to the open trail, and even then, we kept the throttles wide. We didn't even let off the throttles until the tree line broke and the trail spat us out onto the main logging road. The sleds bucked and bounced, but we just kept going. On the highway, we started coasting when we saw the turnoff near town. My brother pulled up beside me, didn't say anything, just nodded once and took off, and then I followed. By the time we got home, my hands were still shaking so bad I could barely unclip my helmet. Mom was mad we were late. Dad wanted to know why we looked like we'd just seen a ghost. Neither of us could hold it in. We spilled everything right there at the kitchen table in front of my mom, my dad, and my grandma. We talked about the dead deer, the tracks we saw, the voices mimicking our names, and then the thing chasing us. Dad just frowned like he didn't buy it and muttered something about us scaring ourselves. Mom just told us we shouldn't have gone off trail, but Grandma, my wonderful grandma, believed every syllable that we said. She was sitting in her chair by the stove, knitting in her lap, but still listening to us intently. She didn't laugh. She didn't scold. She just looked up and said as calm as anything, "You boys saw the Wendigo." That shut all four of us up. I wanted her to be joking, but the way she said it, flat and sure, put ice right back in my stomach. She told us stories then, one she'd heard growing up, about the spirit of hunger in the winter woods, about men who turned into monsters when they'd eaten more than they should, about how the Wendigos still roam, lean and starving, no matter how much it feeds. A week later, a man went missing. Not a stranger, someone from town. He was out checking his trap line. The search party turned up pieces of clothing, a snowshoe twisted and broken. That was it. My dad's friends with the sheriff, and he said, "We didn't find much of him." I didn't want to know how much they actually found, but it was clear that that man was dead. Folks chalked it up to wolves or the cold, or maybe he fell through the ice and the river claimed him and then he was picked apart by scavengers, but me and my brother, we never bought that. To this day, when the subject comes up, we'll exchange a look and keep quiet, because we know what we saw, and we know what followed us through those woods. Whatever killed that deer, whatever screamed in the trees, it got that poor guy too. And you know what the scariest part is? It's still out there.